This is Latter-day Presentations, where we discuss topics and issues of faith for Latter-day Saints. Welcome to today's presentation. You'll notice that I have not posted on this channel for a while, and that is because I've been writing books. This presentation is a preview of a chapter of a book that I've been working on, and it's a topic that we don't tend to explore in a lot of depth. The subject of this presentation is the spirit world and the nature of spirit influence. As Latter-day Saints, we have some very unique insights and understandings to bring to bear on questions around the nature of spirit. We understand that the spirit world is here. So let's begin our uniquely Latter-day Saint discussion of mind and spirit. And let's start with a quote from President Brigham Young. He said, "But where is the spirit world? It is incorporated within this celestial system." And what did he mean by that? He meant that the spirit world is not in some faraway galaxy. It is right here among us. Can you see it with your natural eyes? No. Can you see spirits in this room? No. Suppose the Lord should touch your eyes that you might see. Could you then see the spirits? Yes, as plainly as you now see bodies, as did the servant of Elijah. If the Lord would permit it, and it was his will that it should be done, you could see the spirits that have departed from this world as plainly as you now see bodies with your natural eyes. Now, when we talk about spirits, it's useful to explore different categories of what we mean by that term. Aside from our own spirits, the eternal intelligences that inhabit our bodies, when we look to Scripture, we see references to false spirits, which are spirits that are prone to lying and delusion. We see references to unclean spirits, particularly in the New Testament, where the idea of uncleanness meant violation or rejection of God's law. We also sometimes see references to lost spirits, and these are spirits that wander the earth, for whatever reason, refusing to go to God's light. All of these three categories are spirits that have already lived in mortality. But there's another category, and that is spirits that were never born. We see these referred to as devils or demons, and we understand them to be 1/3 of the host of heaven that were cast down in premortality following the war in heaven. Recently, there was an article published in Meridian magazine by Dan Peterson, and in that article he talked about Brigham Young and how some scholar historians in the church have come to believe that Brigham Young went through what we might call a near-death experience. In some way, he was given a glimpse of the other side, of the spirit world. And we believe that because his descriptions of the spirit world are remarkably detailed and informative. The amount of insight that he brings to this subject is really extraordinary. It's a level of insight that we typically attribute to people who are eyewitnesses of things. So let's read another one of his quotes. He said, "There are myriads of disembodied evil spirits, those who have long ago laid down their bodies here and in the regions round about, among and around us. And they are trying to make us and our children sick, and are trying to destroy us and to tempt us to evil. They will try every possible means they are masters of to draw us aside from the path of righteousness. To be influenced and affected by these spirits is one of the challenges of our mortal experience. And when we read about spirits being among and around us, that can sometimes cause a sense of fear within us. But I hope that as we proceed in this presentation, it will become clear that we have nothing to fear from spirits, and that in the gospel we have tools that will allow us to become impervious to their influence. Consider this quote from President Brigham Young. "If we are faithful to our religion, when we go into the spirit world, the fallen spirits, Lucifer and the third part of the heavenly hosts that came with him, and the spirits of wicked men who have dwelt upon this earth, the whole of them combined will have no influence over our spirits. Is not that an advantage? Yes. All the rest of the children of men are more or less subject to them, and they are subject to them as they were while here in the flesh." Here Brigham Young is teaching that even in the spirit world, spirits are continuing to influence each other in the same ways that they did while they were alive. The dynamics of spirit influence continue even just among spirits in the spirit world. Now, how do spirits influence each other? How do they influence us? Well, spirit influence exists on a spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, we have simple spirit communications. And this is where a spirit might convey impressions or ideas, or sometimes even words. At the other end of the spectrum is a more extreme experience that we call possession. And this is when a spirit takes control of someone's mind and body. In between these two ends of the spectrum, there are a lot of varieties and degrees of spirit influence. Now, to understand the ways that we are influenced by spirits, it's helpful to take a detour and talk about how we imagine our own minds. When I think of my own mind, I think of me, and I think of my mind being the source of my thoughts and feelings and impressions and ideas and more. That is a simple and common way that we think about our minds. But a helpful, and I would say even more accurate way of understanding our minds comes from a field of therapy called internal family systems therapy, or IFS. And in IFS, the understanding is that the human psyche, our heart and mind, is multiple. In other words, it's not just one thing that generates our thoughts and feelings. We should think of it more like a council. And our minds exist in parts. So think of times that you might have said, part of me feels frustrated, or part of me wants to read that book, or part of me wants to go on vacation, but another part of me thinks that I need to get more work done first. In the IFS model, these things that we call parts are actually more autonomous than we might suppose. And parts of our minds try to manage our pain and our trauma. Another way to envision this is as if we were drivers driving cars. Here I am driving and thinking about where I want to go, but I'm not alone as I drive. I have backseat drivers. I have multiple voices there with me in the car, making suggestions, offering different roads to take, coaching me on my driving, reprimanding me sometimes, and even in some cases, reaching for the steering wheel and trying to exert some control over how I drive. In the IFS model, much of how we experience the world reflects the dynamics of these parts within us. So thinking of this in terms of an image. Here we have an image of an environment where we have a bunch of different figures. One of them is a firefighter. Well, in IFS therapy, a firefighter part is a part of us that wants to address really severe pain. And a firefighter part might suggest addictions or other behaviors to numb or avoid our pain. There are also managers here, and those are parts of us that attempt to keep our levels of pain and discomfort in life very manageable. So a manager part might suggest becoming a workaholic in order to avoid remembering painful experiences and so forth. Then we also have sad children here, and those are basically snapshots of our own mind at different points in our life when we experienced really difficult things. So in most minds, this is kind of a chaotic environment. And when it is that way, we're not engaging with the world and with reality in an optimal way. But amid these parts, we can see a glowing, radiant figure. And that figure is what they call in IFS, self. So as Latter-day Saints, our understanding of self is that we are eternal spirit beings, organized by God in premortality. Our fundamental nature is divine, because that is our heritage. And what IFS therapists find is that as they work with our different parts, the more they can enable our core self to exercise its influence in this environment, the better off we are. Even in situations where people have experienced very, very severe trauma in life, IFS therapists find that this core self essentially cannot be hurt. It is not affected by these difficult experiences. And so when we are what we call in self, operating from that core understanding of who we are, we have great resources of wisdom and patience and compassion. And we engage with life and reality and the world in a much better way. This idea of self in IFS brings to my mind the passage in the Book of Mormon, talking about the three Nephites and how their bodies were changed in a way that they were only able to feel sorrow for the sins of the world, but no other forms of pain and discomfort that we are used to. Thinking of that in IFS terms, whatever change they experienced allowed them to live fully in self and not be driven about by all kinds of other influences. So with that very, very basic background in internal family systems thinking, let's return to some insights from Brigham Young. He taught, when you lay down this tabernacle, where are you going? Into the spiritual world. Are you going into Abraham's bosom? No, not anywhere nigh there, but into the spirit world. Where is the spirit world? It is right here. This means that as we go throughout our daily lives, we are intermingling with spirits in the spirit world. Our daily activities take place among these spirits. So returning to our minds in the IFS model, we can understand that sometimes some of what we think of as parts might not actually be parts of us. They might be influences from the realm of spirits, from the spirit world. And it turns out that many IFS therapists have arrived at this reality independently of the gospel. For this presentation, I'm going to draw upon some insights from a book by an IFS practitioner named Bob Falconer. Falconer has been practicing IFS for decades, and he has had many, many encounters with parts that are not part of the person. They are spirit entities. And his book is called The Others Within Us, Internal Family Systems, Porous Mind, and Spirit Possession. And it reflects his experiences, but also surveys of other people all throughout the world, from different locations and different cultures. Here are some of his insights. Falconer teaches that the mind is porous, or like a sponge. Things can come and go in and out of our minds. People all over the world have experiences with what he calls unattached burdens. We call those spirits. And these are entities that are not part of us. He also teaches that there are differences in how various cultures think about these entities, but there are strong commonalities across cultures and across different nations. So a big part of Bob Falconer's project is trying to help other IFS therapists identify when influences in a person's mind are coming from that person or coming from something external to that person. Now, I have found this book tremendously useful, but I also need to offer some words of caution as I talk about it. In Bob Falconer's approach to trying to understand spirit phenomena, he casts a very, very wide net. And some of the things that he brings in are useful. Many of the other things that come in with that net are not useful. Trying to understand the spirit world is like having a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces. And Bob Falconer's work is like dumping a pile of puzzle pieces. And as you sort through, sometimes pieces fit, and we gain insights into the nature of spirit phenomena. But many of the pieces on the table here are not particularly helpful, and in my view, many of the pieces do not even belong to this particular puzzle. So as we try to sort through different people's experiences and perceptions of these things, it is very important to exercise discernment and intellectual discipline. In Falconer's surveys of different nations and cultures, we see a lot of different speculation and traditions from different places and peoples. And sometimes we see people arriving at shared perceptions across cultures. Now, when we apply the lens of revelation, we can narrow down the insights in these kinds of materials. And using the restored gospel as our lens, we can arrive at a high degree of confidence that the principles that we are talking about represent factual reality. But once again, this is a process that requires discernment and intellectual discipline. This is not a subject to explore just out of random curiosity. It is definitely a challenging subject. It's one for serious people. Now, returning to Brigham Young, I want to go back to a segment of a previous quote that we discussed. And I want to focus on this phrase, subject to them as they were while here in the flesh. If we are subject to spirit influences here while in the flesh, what exactly does that look and sound like? And here to illustrate this concept taught by President Brigham Young, I'm going to quote a passage from Bob Falconer's book. Here he quotes a therapist in a different country. He says, Callie said that every therapist should know about these entities. They are real, and they are indeed around. She recommends that therapists work with their parts who are afraid of them. She believes that we need to have respect. These entities have tentacles and a deep need to reconnect to the world via a living body. They can strongly influence thought processes and emotions. Now let's consider a case study of what that looks like. Falconer relates, I started working with this woman about this thing in her. It was relentlessly negative. Usually with an inner critic, you can find out why it's criticizing, such as it wants to keep the person safe, or motivate them, or improve their lot in life. There's a good intention in there somewhere. We looked for this energy's good intention over and over. I would ask her, can you ask this thing why it keeps criticizing you so harshly? It would just say things like, I want to cut her down to size. I'd ask, what's good about cutting her down to size? Well, then she wouldn't be so arrogant. And what's good about her not being arrogant? I just want to destroy her. It just kept stating negative things. This is the first important indication that something is not part of a person's system. Now, some time ago, I did a presentation on this channel called Accusation, the Epistemology of Hell. There I explored the spirit of accusation and how it is motivated by a desire to destroy things and destroy people. The spirit of accusation reflects the influence of Satan. So when we have that spirit of accusation, that's a good indicator that our thought patterns are not coming from God, or even from the essence of our own spirit. If we hear voices inside our minds that are relentlessly negative in this way, that is a good indication that those messages are coming from an evil influence. Another insight from Bob Falconer is found in this story. I was teaching about this point once, and one of the students, a powerful woman from Nigeria, interrupted and said forcefully, almost yelling, "They lie." When I got past my surprise, I was so grateful that she spoke and gave us some insight into another culture's views. She also said that in her tradition, many UBs were believed to be the spirits of deceased people, some of whom had been dead for so long that they forgot who they really were and came to believe they were parts of the person. In IFS terminology, there's a concept called blending, and that is when we can't tell the difference between the different parts of our psyche because they have become blended together and they're indistinguishable. But here we see that it's also possible for spirit influences to attach themselves to people for so long that they become blended with the person's psyche, and they can no longer tell the difference between themselves and the spirit to which they are now attached. Now, if we understand that spirits can become blended in this way, that is a good explanation for why some people throughout history have claimed to have memories of past lives that they have never lived. It is not their memories that they are relating. Those memories belong to someone else and can be communicated through impressions through spirit influence. Another insight: sometimes UBs are passed down as legacy burdens from our ancestors. In other words, these spirit influences can go back generations and be passed down from our parents, our grandparents, and beyond. In a story from the book, we read, Lisa experienced confusion. Is this connection to me or my family? We asked, is this from the ancestors? Yes. We did a multi-generational legacy unburdening. She passed the burdens back up through the generations of ancestors to the first ancestors in her lineage, who took them in. We then asked those first ancestors to send the burdens, or the spirits, up into the light, where the burdens could be transformed. We read here that it's possible to remove these influences from our family lines. And for those of us who are serious about temple and family history work, this story resonates deeply. One of the core realities of temple and family history work is that filling our own lives with light and service and goodness in the gospel has an effect on those who have gone before us. It blesses not just our posterity, but also our ancestral lineage. The choices that we make in living the gospel here in mortality affect not just us, but countless spirits who are invested in our well-being. And let's transition here to a discussion of basic concepts around the nature of evil that we learn from these experiences. One of these insights is that evil is damnation. It's a stopping of development and progression. Another insight from Falconer's work is that evil's relationship to good is parasitic. A soul that is corrupted and consumed with evil will try to attach itself to good people. This is something that in mortality we see in the spirit of apostasy, for example. We can observe how apostate individuals and groups often orbit the church and orbit members of the church, constantly attacking and criticizing and accusing, deriving some kind of validation and satisfaction from doing that. This is a very important insight that we will explore more in depth later. But a final insight here is that evil resists the light. It resists examination. Evil influences will often try to hide and escape our detection so that they can continue to influence us. Let's read another quote from Brigham Young. He said, "When the breath leaves the body, your life has not become extinct. Your life is still in existence. And when you are in the spirit world, everything there will appear as natural as things now do. Spirits will be familiar with spirits in the spirit world, will converse, behold, and exercise every variety of communication with one another as familiarly and naturally as while here in tabernacles. There, as here, all things will be natural, and you will understand them as you now understand natural things. You will there see that those spirits we are speaking of are active, they sleep not. And you will learn that they are striving with all their might, laboring and toiling diligently as any individual would to accomplish an act in this world, to destroy the children of men." Now think about how miserable you would have to be to want to expend that much negative energy to that degree constantly. And let's consider this from Bob Falconer's book. In Korea, it's commonly believed that the negative spirits are staying because they have unresolved Han. Han is an emotion that we don't have an exact equivalent for in English. It's a mix of anguish, pain, resentment, and a sense of injustice. And let's reflect on this insight for a moment. Some people have come to believe that whenever a person dies and transitions over to the spirit world, they are automatically better. They're automatically happy. And that they are free of grievances and victim identity and negativity that they carried during mortality. But here we are reading that that is not the case. We bring with us to the other side the spiritual energy that we carried here in mortality. And we engage in the same relational patterns that we engaged in during mortality. Consider this, and there are some people who refer to these beings as the feeders. They feed off of human misery, and that's what they're doing. They create human misery. They sort of farm it, and then they can feed off it. Continuing this insight, these UBs seem to be some kind of parasite. They often get into a person by promising power. They might give the appearance of power, or at least enough power to give the person the illusion that they have more power, but they actually cripple the person. They keep people weak, dependent, and powerless in order to feed off of them. What it really does is increase the isolation of that person, so the person becomes more dependent, more isolated, and more in need of the energies of the unattached burden or spirit. Sometimes the unattached burdens come in offering numbness when there is great pain, and then they cause pain in order to create the need for numbness. All of these parasitic behaviors are offers of a solution that actually makes things worse. I'm going to reiterate here because this point is so important. If this parasitic behavior characterizes our relational dynamics in mortality, we will take it with us to the other side and continue exactly what we were doing. Once again, it is a core, important, essential insight about the nature of evil that evil is parasitic. Evil influences create dependency and weakness, whereas God's influence strengthens us and makes us self-reliant. And with that in mind, let's talk about removal of evil spirits. And here I'm going to speak from some experience. I happen to have served my mission in Brazil, where spirit phenomena are a lot more open and overt than in some other parts of the world. And I speak from experience when I say that the priesthood is definitely effective for the removal of evil spirits. Also, that evil spirits hate the name of Christ and they hate representations of him. Now, why is that? Well, think about what Christ embodies. He embodies wellness. He embodies wholeness. His divine character leaves him immune to influences of evil. In the presence of Christ, and in the presence of souls who carry his spirit, evil influences become extremely uncomfortable. And this is because evil spirits hate light and goodness. Let's ponder a moment this passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 3. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For every one that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. This is a very profound passage that helps to illustrate why spirits resist light to such a great degree. And now let's return to another quote from Brigham Young. He said, "Spirits are just as familiar with spirits as bodies are with bodies, though spirits are composed of matter so refined as not to be tangible to this coarser organization. They walk, converse, and have their meetings. And the spirits of good men like Joseph and the elders, who have left this church on earth for a season to operate in another sphere, are rallying all their powers and going from place to place, preaching the gospel. And Joseph is directing them, saying, 'Go ahead, my brethren, and if they hedge up your way, walk up and command them to disperse.' You have the priesthood and can disperse them, but if any of them wish to hear the gospel, preach to them." Once again, the priesthood is very effective for dispelling evil influences. But is use of the priesthood the only way to do that? That's a good question for us to consider. Think about this recollection of some teachings that Joseph Smith gave to sisters in the church. Joseph gave a lecture on the priesthood, showing how the sisters would come in possession of the privileges, blessings, and gifts of the priesthood, and that the signs should follow them, such as healing the sick, casting out devils, and that they might attain unto these blessings by a virtuous life and conversation and diligence in keeping all the commandments. This strongly echoes what Brigham Young said about how living our religion well leaves evil spirits powerless to influence us. Consider also this passage from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9. "And John answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us. And we forbade him, because he followeth not us. But Jesus said, Forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me." Here was a situation where disciples of Jesus who had been ordained noticed that other people who were not ordained and did not hold that priesthood authority were also casting out devils. And Jesus tells them to not worry about that, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name. That phrase is very important. The name of Christ is very effective for casting out evil influences, even among people who are not ordained to the priesthood. Some situations of spirit influence call for what we might call hard exorcism, where under the authority of the priesthood and in the name of Christ we cast out an evil influence. But there is also what I might call soft exorcism that is done without invoking the priesthood. Consider this scripture from the book of Matthew. "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." If I'm living the gospel in a way that my body is full of light, it's going to be extremely hard for an evil influence to want to attach itself to me, or even be in my presence. And here's another valuable teaching from the book of Matthew. Jesus said, "When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with himself 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first." The principle here is that it's not enough to simply remove evil influences from our souls. We need to fill our lives with light and goodness through service and living the gospel. We need to live in a way that we can constantly have the presence of God's Spirit within us. Think of the power of this phrase from the sacrament prayer, have His Spirit to be with them. And if we try to visualize that using the IFS framework, we think of this environment of different voices and influences. And there are also spirit influences that affect us. But if we are living in a way that we have the Spirit of Christ residing in our heart and mind just like a part, that will have the effect of dispelling evil and bringing order to the other parts of our psyche, such that our self, our divine essence, can come to the forefront and allow our hearts and minds to reflect our divine nature. But to create this environment, we have choices to make. And one of these is expressed very well in this BYU devotional from March 2016. This devotional was given by Jennifer Rockwood, and let's hear some of what she had to say.
This is one way that you can search for light. Another way is to surround yourselves with individuals who can inspire you and lift you to great places. We must choose our friends and those we associate with very carefully. We must ask ourselves, are these individuals helping move us towards the light? Or are they allowing us to let some darkness slip in? Are they motivating and inspiring us, or are they bringing us down? Do they help us see what is great about the world, or do they cast a shadow of negativity? Again, we mostly have a choice of who we spend our time with.
What she taught here is very important. When we make choices to associate ourselves with people who are full of light and goodness, their light and goodness is going to radiate into our lives, and vice versa, and make it increasingly more difficult for evil influences to affect us. I also love this quote from the book The Spiritual Physics of Light by scientist Aaron Franklin. He said, with the light of Christ embedded within every soul, the soul being the spirit plus the body, that comes into the world, and because we know God is light, I hypothesize that one function of the light of Christ is to be the spiritual light source within each person's soul, capable of filling us with light if we have the spiritual energy to fuel it. Even the most powerful light bulb can be dimmed by controlling the amount of electrical energy that flows through it. So it is with the light of Christ in our souls. Spiritual light will radiate corresponding to the amount of spiritual energy with which it is provided. And again, if we want to fill our souls with that energy that magnifies the light of Christ within us, one of the most important decisions that we can make is to adhere to this counsel given by Jennifer Rockwood, to associate ourselves with people who are good and who are living the gospel well. Now, in closing, I want to go to some additional insights from President Brigham Young. He said here, to be gentle and kind, modest and truthful, to be full of faith and integrity, doing no wrong, is of God. Goodness sheds a halo of loveliness around every person who possesses it, making their countenances beam with light, and their society desirable because of its excellency. They are loved of God, of holy angels, and of all the good on earth, while they are hated, envied, and admired and feared by the wicked. Living the gospel well will allow us to be feared by wicked spiritual influences. In light of this truth, we can ponder new depths to the promises associated with wearing the garment of the holy priesthood, and the protective power associated with our temple covenants. Finally, let's consider this promise from Brigham Young. When we pass into the spirit world, we shall possess a measure of his power. Here, we are continually troubled with ills and ailments of various kinds. In the spirit world, we are free from all this and enjoy life, glory, and intelligence. And we have the Father to speak to us, Jesus to speak to us, and angels to speak to us. And we shall enjoy the society of the just and the pure who are in the spirit world until the resurrection. We have choices before us here in mortality. And if we choose misery and embrace evils that corrupt our souls here in mortality, we will bring that to the spirit world and continue exactly how we were in mortality. But if we live the gospel well, There are amazing, remarkable promises about the quality of existence that we will have in the spirit world and the quality of society and relationships that we will enjoy there. So let's take our choices seriously and live the gospel well. Now, if any of you viewers have any insights or stories or questions, please post them as comments, because I want to do a follow-up video to address any comments or questions that you might have on this topic. It is my belief that as we near the second coming of Christ, spirit influences are going to become much more open and recognizable everywhere in the world. And as that happens, we need to understand what we are dealing with. In the meantime, let us live with an eye single to the glory of God, so that our bodies may be filled with light. Thank you for joining me. This has been an episode of Latter-day Presentations. We would like to remind viewers that our channel represents our own views and not necessarily any official positions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thanks again for joining us.